Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets achieve the goal that every fan base in sports history dreams of, getting a little bit closer to being one of the worst teams in the league. We dive in next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marbeck. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Get over to FanDuel.com today. And by the way, check out the free daily newsletters as well at LockedOnDaily.com. All the hosts across the league giving that little extra insight about your club. Here's an extra insight, Doug. The Nets lost really big, 116-86 to the Toronto Raptors, which is exactly what we were all hoping for.
Hadn't said it all year. Saved it. Saved it for when it counted. Said there was absolutely no way the Nets could win this game. And we meant it because we hadn't said it this entire season when others have trumpeted that kind of talking point. Even though we've discussed the importance of losing, but this game we said it's a must loss. It's a must lose.
You don't break out the kind of filthy talk until it really matters, right? Like you don't. No, but you don't drop the F-bomb at your parents when you're 7 years old unless you really wanted that extra cookie and a glass of milk.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you really, really need it. And this was one of those cases where the Nets just had to lose this game. They had to secure this spot. They've already kind of done themselves a little dirty with where they are in the standings from an odds standpoint. And now they're battling it out with Philly, who's its own thing, its own sort of weird losing Terminator going there also in the East. But if you're looking to lose a game, there's a couple things that you're going to want to check. There's a couple boxes you're going to want to check as a team. 36% from the field, check. 20% from three, check. Get out rebounded by 16, 46-33, check.
Yep.
Lose the turnover battle, 19-11, check. The Nets did everything they could to lose this one and made it. It wasn't a nail biter. Let's put it that way.
To put it mildly.
So they did, in quotes, everything they had to do to make sure that this thing was secured. Played one of their worst games of the season just when it mattered the most.
You better believe it. There are a couple of things I want to highlight out of this game in a little bit, like Nicholas Claxton and his 5 blocks, and something that it did trigger for me relative to years past where we would talk about these kind of what felt like significant moments for players' development, right? And Claxton being among them because he's been so good at being that versatile defensive piece. Didn't really matter much in this one. when we're talking about the massive loss that they took here. And as you say, this wasn't close. It didn't start out close. It didn't continue close. It didn't end close. It was 32-18 at the end of the first quarter. So that pretty much tells you the entire story. And the only thing that I'll say is here too, the reason why I lose this game, because you mentioned Philadelphia, who also did their own work, although Philly did what the Nets have done time and again, where you're like, good, okay, let's get this loss, let's get out of the way. And then they made a little bit of their own run there, and they made their game interesting, ultimately losing, I think, by 6 in theirs. So they still stay the same here. But when you go over and look at the Tankathon odds, we'll just get this out of the way at the top here. It mattered significantly because Toronto is now 3 games back from Brooklyn. So we're sitting here with 73 games played. You'd like to think that that's enough of a cushion where you don't have to worry about dropping back that extra spot. So obviously we're going to talk more about this game, but that was the most significant thing that you could accomplish here. We know there's some other matchups with Philadelphia and who they're going to play and the Nets, and we can think about New Orleans maybe just being ahead of them there. Also 3-game cushion, though. So this is the sweet spot. And if you want to be able to take some of the strain, I put that in heavy quotes, of the end of the season, this is how you do it. Lose what was the most important game so that if you're a Nets fan, if you're a Nets organization, you go, this is where we are. This is right where we're going to pick. This is the wheelhouse. And you can start to think about, what's your draft strategy going to look like if you land in that range, understanding it could still pivot and fall different places. At least you know that you've given yourself as good of odds as you could expect by the time you got to these last 10 to 15 games of the year.
Yeah, I think that this game probably, we talked about this before, but I think this game secured the 5 to 6 spot for them, right? 5 or 6. I think they're just locked into that range. I think they're going to struggle to catch New Orleans. I think that Toronto will struggle to catch them. I think it's just going to be Philly them and Philly just sort of battling it out here for the end around who can lose more games. And Philly's been so egregious with this that I'm not confident that the Nets don't finish sixth. Like, I just think that like sixth is probably where they're going to be, because Philly has been egregious. I don't have another word for it. It's just egregious with what they're doing. And I just don't, it's shameless, I guess would be another word. Like the shameless tanking. The Nets don't seem to have the shameless tank in them. And I think in these last, 9 games, like shameless is probably going to win when it goes to like where they want to finish. And so I'm not confident that they're able to outstrip Philly. Go ahead. Yeah.
No, and it is notable that when you look at these draft odds right now, Philly's ahead of the Brooklyn Nets, but they have the identical record. So when you go to the percentages, it's 39.9% for a top 4 pick for Philly. It's 39.5 for the Brooklyn Nets. It's 9.8% for the first overall pick for Philly. It's 9.7. So if they finish with identical records, the percentages do live right next to each other. Now, all the ping pong balls fall and we turn around and we go, oh, Philly finished above the Nets. We'll say stupid percentages, like those micro points really mattered. But at least on paper, if they finish with even records, it's not going to be as big as if you were talking about getting, winning that game against Toronto and then saying, well, 31.9%, 7.5%. Like the numbers look significantly different in that regard.
Well, yeah, and it's worth pointing out here too. It's like, so the difference between the 5th and 6th spot, these odds are like, you need a math degree, but it's helpful if you look at it. Like the odds, the way they shake out is when you're between the 5th and the 6th pick, the odds for the 1 through 4 pick are like the same, right?
Yeah.
So it's 1 through 4 is nearly identical. It's like a 10th of decimal points off. Where the big difference is, and this matters, is that
5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, like down as you go down the lottery, right?
It's like you have, like when you're at 6, it's funny, when you're at 6, you actually can't pick 5th. For some reason, there's like no odds that you can get 5th. I'm not sure how that really works, but then
another really, shrewd decision making, smart, well thought out process by the NBA. Like this is don't worry, we got this all figured out.
I almost feel like I'm reading this wrong sometimes when I look at this, but anyway, it's like you greatly increase your picks out at like 8, 9, and 10, well, a little bit of 10, but it's like 8 and 9. It's like you're much more likely to pick 8 and 9. Yeah. When you were in the 6th spot, you're much more likely to pick 8 and 9 than the 5th spot. And that's where it matters. It begins to extend out into a place you don't want to be. And so that's actually really what it matters. So like, yeah, same odds for 1 through 4 between 5 and 6, but you're really upping the chance that you are much lower in the draft. And that's the scary part. Like that, it's really that part that's the scary part, is that like opening up the opportunity to get just not one of these like top 6 picks or something like that. And that's not amazing.
So by the way, here, we'll talk more about this game coming up in a second, but I'll also break down the agony that the Nets fan base will probably launch itself into on draft lottery night once you get past, I don't know, say pick number 4 or 5. We'll do that here and talk a little more about performances inside this Raptors Nets game coming up in just one moment.
All right, before we get to that, March Madness is here. FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra dollars using everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, even who's cutting down the Nets. Look, right now, I'm taking a look at Florida minus 6.5. I'm gonna put. What's that? What'd you say?
Take a look. Take a look.
Okay, well, this is the one FanDuel wants here. Well, because I'm in a good situation because I'm in a pool where I know that I'm gonna win something if Florida covers, but there's a little thing called hedging, baby. That's why we're gonna go the other side. Maryland plus 6.5. FanDuel actually has me covered, coming and going. That's just some of what you're gonna get over on FanDuel. Super easy to use. When you win, you get paid instantly, no waiting around. You're going to stay in the action. Tournament games are happening basically every day at this point as we roll through the NCAA March Madness. Visit FanDuel.com and get in college hoops action all tournament long at FanDuel.com.
All right, as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode, obviously talking about the Toronto Raptors game. The Nets lose. By the way, there's a lot of things to get here. But NCAA tournament, which is going on tonight, and you've got BYU, Alabama, and you're going to have the Maryland, Florida. So there's a couple things. One, watch it because there's some players in there like Queen that you want to watch. He had the game winner the other night. Notable that everyone after that game, there's a contingent. I have family members and friends who are like, I love the college game. It's so much more pure. It doesn't have all the big dollars necessarily of the NBA, even though all these guys are getting paid money now in big contracts. But the conversation about Queen with the gather before his shot, where it was like, so just the gather standard operating procedure, no matter what level of basketball you play. And it's true, but it gave me that little, hey man, he's just preparing for the NBA. You go ahead, you take your gallop step, a couple of dribbles, your 9, whatever it is, and then you launch that beauty up there, and everyone's like, hooray, you did it. Doesn't really matter, no matter what level you play at. Just really noteworthy for me. It kind of, I don't know.
Well, the Euro step that they gather, purists hate it because like I watched basketball with my dad, and he's like, "That's a travel. Everything's a travel." We've watched with the old heads. Yeah. Everything's a travel for those guys. Now forget that, like when they watch basketball, guys couldn't even dribble with their left hands. Like that doesn't matter. But like,
here nor there. Like, I like it where everything went right into the corner and then could never get out of it.
Or like when they watched, if you were like, it was kind of like if you stood right under the basket, you could take a shot, and otherwise, like no one else could do anything else, and everyone kind of stood on top of each other. That part gets completely ignored with the old guys. It's just like that's a travel. Like so. Anyway, yeah, always fun to watch. Always fun to watch with the old dudes.
Yeah. So anyway, I felt compelled to point that out there. We go back inside this game. Obviously, there's a couple of things that I do want to get to here. And as you mentioned, those odds. So I will just point out before we talk about Nicholas Claxton and what typically would be a post game where we would come in and say, look at this guy. He's doing his thing. 5 blocks in this game. Just very quickly on draft night, if all the things stay the same, as you mentioned at the end of the first segment, because of the way the odds shift, the second that they say, and with the 4th overall pick, and with the 5th overall pick, once that gets stated, every Nets fan's going to go, well, that's it. Give us pick 11. Like, because of the way the odds shift, everyone is going to plummet themselves into the doom and gloom prospect of it. So it would be, I think, beneficial for a certain segment if they just give the Nets like a top 5 pick. I think it's just right. It's only fair. Otherwise, there are some people that are going to need to be on watch.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. We talked about this the other day, but we're gonna be in this spot where you're never gonna actually know what they would have gotten, but it just is so meaningful. People just can't. I've seen this all season long, and it's like very clear to me now. The difference of having a 50% chance at a top 5 pick and 100% chance at a top 5 pick is like something that folks just haven't been able to wrap their head around. I mean, they're gonna see it now, but like. When you are Washington and you have, or sorry, well now it's Utah. If you're Utah and you just have 100% chance at a top 5 pick, and the Nets have a 50% chance at it, like how can you not see how big of a difference that is, right? It's like, oh, what's a lottery? I was like, yeah. And the lottery odds greatly skew in your favor when you're in this section of the draft, right? So like, that's just something that's like folks have just never gotten their head. Some folks have just never gotten their heads around. We're too late in the game now to really cry over it, but this has been sort of the talking point of the whole season is when the ping pong balls are coming out and then or the team names are coming out and you're seeing the chance of right now where they are 30% chance, well, no, 29% chance of picking 7th. That's where the Nets are now. 29% chance of picking 7th. Like, okay, does it make it a little clearer now?
You have the full one up there. Break down like for the top 4 teams. Break down their odds when it gets to 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, like you know what I mean, where their percentage chances are to land in those spots. Like for Utah,
it's too hard to read. Okay, I'm not gonna do it because it's too hard to read the numbers out here, and everyone's just gonna get lost. Let me just say, there's a good tankathon.com/pick _ odds has it right. So if you just go to Tankathon and you go to pick _ odds, or just go to the more section, you can see it very clearly. Just put it this way: Utah has no chance of picking outside the top 5. Washington has a 20% chance of just picking 6, no worse. Charlotte, it just gets a little worse each time with the 6th, 7th, 8th pick. The Nets right now have a 29% chance of picking 7th, and they have a 50% chance of picking 1 through 4, 40% chance of picking 1 through 4, and a 30% chance of picking 7th. So like, this is the part where, and I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to read all the numbers because it's everyone's going to stop listening. But like
the tiered system of it is starting with Brooklyn and going up. Brooklyn can, at a very, very small percentage chance, get the 10th pick. That's the lowest.
Yes.
For Philly, it's 9th. For New Orleans, it's 8th. It's 7th for Charlotte. It's 6th for Washington, and it's 5th for Utah. But by the way, the chances for Utah to get 5th are 47.9%. The chances, so you get higher and higher there because they're condensing it down, right? Utah can only pick at this moment right now 1 through 5. 1 through 6, 1 through 7, right? And as you get out, right at Brooklyn, this is where, so from a tankathon standpoint or from an odd standpoint, they cannot pick 5th. As currently constituted, they miss 5th. Toronto misses 5th and 6th. Miami would miss 5, 6, and 7. So they gap it out. If you think about it, it's like this little tiny pie slice that keeps getting wider the further you get down in the lottery odds. So it is interesting to think about it that way, as you mentioned at the top, with that 5th pick and then in and around it, 5th, 6th, and so on, that listen, even though the best percentage chance at the top of the draft there, we understand all those things, but it opens this door. And we've seen it before in the past. Some of these small percentages end up landing you in the better or worse position than you thought you were going to. But if you know for a fact you can't get the 5th pick, well, then you know you can't get the 5th pick. And that's why I go back to picks 1 through 4 happen. 5th pick comes up. Let's go. Well, we know we're not getting this one. So all of a sudden you start to think about the what if of what
goes the other way. Right. Remember when they read it, it goes the opposite way because it goes up. But like you can still do the math about where you can't land. And this is the thing. Yeah, you put it really well right there. The thing that no one got all season, I wish I had done a better job of explaining this, is that it wasn't so much it's actually funny. It is about
the 100%
about
the top pick if you're Utah. It's
protecting against the worst
outside of.
Yeah. That's it. That's what I'm saying. It's protecting against the worst outcomes. Like this is actually what we miss. I wish I had spent in the endless hours I spent arguing about this on the internet that earned me a lot, by the way. I mean, like earn me time, earn me money, earn me happiness, all the things that you can earn by arguing with dopes on Twitter. So no worries there. But I wish I wish one thing I had
1,000 moments with my family and children for the moments I had on the internet.
It was worth it. When we're at St. Peter's at the Pearly Gates, I'll be like, hey, did you see when I was with DXM 17 numbers out account number like that they asked? And did you see the point that I made about how it's like not a lottery and we're protecting, we're trying to get this? Like, did you see that? And he's like, I don't know, walk right in, friend. Sorry, I missed that. I missed that. Yeah. No, just walk right in. So like, but the argument really should have been, it's not so much about spiking the first one, which it is, but it's actually about protecting against not picking 8th or not picking 7th or things like that. That's really that's the thing that I actually think I'm realizing now that people didn't understand. And is that you're not, yes, you have a chance at Cooper Flag, but what you really don't want to be thinking about is whether you're taking like Jase Richardson at 10th, because that's something that the Jazz and the Wizards aren't going to worry at all about. Right? Like they're not going to worry about falling to 10th or falling to 8th. And the Nets, well, not 10th, but like the Nets have that in their range of outcomes, even if it's minimal.
By the way, this is the exact this actually extends the conversation we've had about like how fugazi this entire operation is and why the NBA, this is messed up. It's not just that these teams are inspiring tanking. This is why. You're not just tanking for the best chance of the top odds. If you're Utah, Washington, Charlotte, you're like, Charlotte right now, it's like no worse than 7. Like that's as far as we'll go. No worse. Again, you talk about these numbers, right? New Orleans and the percentages, when we give those back end ones, like they're still heavily weighted near the top. The interesting thing I will just say last on the tank conversation here, which let me be honest with you guys, we have Fan Take Friday tomorrow. We already got some good questions lined up. Get them in. It wasn't my intention. I'll put it this way. My co-host likes to think about multiple days of the show, and knowing that we're going to need to talk about something else on our Friday show. So he would have said, let's have this tank conversation on Friday. But yours truly could not help but derail this conversation. And I'm also pretty proud because I made it like almost halfway through the first segment before I started to leave.
Well, in your defense on this, So in your defense on this one, though, the game was such a disaster that like, what are we going to talk? I'm not even trying to throw our hands up here, but what are we going to be like? Hey, did you Dariq Whitehead? Okay, we'll talk Whitehead tomorrow, by the way. So like, no big deal. So by the way, this is me basically telling Adam, don't bring up Dariq Whitehead right now because we're going to talk about him on the show.
Stay tuned for segment 3. What's going to, by the way, guys, coming up,
because what Adam was about to do was queue up what we're going to talk about on Friday for segment and bury it at the back end of the show. So like what I'm telling Adam directly here is do not queue up the Dariq Whitehead notes here, because we're going to save that one because someone did have a question about Dariq Whitehead, and what I don't want to do is have to discuss this after the show. Okay, so anyway, So what you're getting, this, buddy, this, or folks out here, this is what you get 73 games into a 23-50 season is what you start to see when you start to see the curtain get pulled back here. It's such as it were the thin, very, very thin professional curtain that we have draped over the front of the podcast. This is starting to get what you can see. Okay, we're gonna talk a little bit more about this tank stuff. We will get into the game just a little bit. We'll do that all here in just 1 second.
All right. As we tie a pretty little bow on today's Locked On Nets episode, obviously the Brooklyn Nets fall 116-86. They all but secure themselves a top 6 position. They, of course, are battling potentially with Philly to get into that 5th spot. And notably, when we talk about being in that 6th position, one of the things you can also look to is that like their percentages around the 7th and 8th pick are pretty darn high, right? So Philly gets more in the upper echelon. The Nets get pushed back a little bit. So you can think about like 7 and 8. So if you're looking at the draft right now and you want to have the conversation about what are the prospects we like, who do we think is going to fall there, talk about 7 and 8. From a percentage standpoint, that's where you want to focus. Who are the guys you think you could probably take 7th or 8th there, and then potentially even a little bit later if things go the wrong way. Now, on Dariq Whitehead, what I really liked, as we talk about coming out of this game, the other thing that came to mind for me, I will just say, is that you mentioned about other teams, what Philly's doing. Well, shout out to Darko over there, little head coach for the Toronto Raptors, because I saw a quote from him leading into this game that felt very similar to Jordi Fernandez. They were like, are you going to sit your guys? You got the tank and everything else. And he said, paraphrasing, I can't really think about that ahead of the game. These games matter for the young players, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the thing that I took away from this game, Doug, when you go and you look at the box score, is I was like, oh, right, Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett, like just point stop on the conversation there. This was both teams putting out with availability and a couple of things. No Emmanuel quickly over on the other side for the Raptors and a couple other guys. Jakob Poeltl didn't play either. But like this is the best version of the Brooklyn Nets. Like this is the team. The Nets have played basically the best version of their team all year. Other teams have finagled their lineups and done different things. Credit to the Raptors. They came out, and I wondered if on paper they just thought, honestly, we could sit Scotty Barnes. We could sit RJ Barrett. We're still probably going to end up winning this game, so we might as well put our best foot forward because the Brooklyn Nets are always going to struggle in ones like these, and they are showing a little bit of a dedication to this tank. No Cam Johnson, obviously.
Well, yeah, I mean, they've been one of these kind of like mini egregious teams too. They're not as it's not as bad as some of the other ones, but it was bad.
Like, it's not disgusting.
Well, and they got called out a few weeks ago when they had a winnable game and all their best players just stayed on the bench and they lost, right? And so they have been strategically sitting guys. They've been basically swapping out like IQ, Jakob, and then Barnes really hasn't sat that much, but the RJ Barrett has sat a lot. And so like they've just been kind of like swapping these guys in and out at times, and you have to play this tricky dance because teams have gotten fined, and for some teams the fines like kind of do mount up, right? Like it was 100,000. It was 100,000 for the Jazz, which is nothing, kind of, but the next one is like $1 million, and then the next one is even more. And so it's like, well, that it does start it.
The first one's like, hey, here's the warning shot. Like this is the warning shot.
The first one is like, hey, don't do this again.
Enjoy it. So you better be strategic when you choose to do it, and you're going to take a fine. This is the cheap one.
And maybe if you're the Knicks, like in New York, it doesn't matter. They're not doing it, but I'm just saying, like for like these, like, Knicks or Lakers or these huge franchises where like the money isn't as important. Utah kind of like does matter, right? Toronto probably does matter, and so it's like we really can't butt up against the line. And so, but yeah, I agree with you that they kind of throw it out there. It's mostly just goes back to what we've said so many times: is the system is so screwed that. The NBA has just done themselves so dirty. The product's terrible. 116-86. This game's unwatchable. It's unwatchable. We'll talk about Whitehead tomorrow, but some of these other guys. The Nets had 3 guys in double digits. Claxton at 22, Zaire Williams at 13, Jalen Wilson off the bench at 10. No one else was into double digits. I mean, D'Lo scored 5 points. Keon Johnson scored 8 points. I think they were trying. Like, this is kind of the version of the Nets I thought we'd see a lot more of. Is this like can't score, can't do anything, like just it's all a mess. Their best player in plus minus, Daron Sharp is out of the game. So like it's, I don't know. I'm rambling now in the end of a tank season, but it's just one of these situations where you can't trust like what anyone's putting out there. I guess the Raptors did like a slightly better job, and you're right, like. all these teams, most of these teams just have a much higher talent floor than the Nets. Like
Right.
way higher talent floor than the Nets.
That was really the crux of it. Was that it was like, yeah, everyone's going to manipulate and do whatever. And by the way, like, if you want to play the devil's advocate of the Brooklyn Nets, they didn't believe in tanking. They were developing their guys, and who cares about the odds? Well, the flip side of that is, yeah, it didn't really matter. Like, the winning streak and everything else, but it's like the talent pool is the talent pool. I could almost, with Cam Thomas, being set to the side, we understand that, in his injuries, but I could swap out my 5 and my 5, and I don't know if it gets much better or much worse one side of the margin or the other. You do that with any of these other teams, as Doug highlighted in our last episode. You go through and you look at the top teams at the top of the draft odds right now. All of them have the star on their roster. All of them have, or high premier young talent that is already established or establishing themselves. The Brooklyn Nets don't have that. Like, they don't have those players. And so they are uniquely in a different spot than many of them. And it's why we talk about the draft, the way it's structured, and look at a team like Brooklyn, not just because we cover them, but because from an NBA standpoint, you're going, well, you're not giving the team that needs to add the star the most, that needs the premier talent, that is maybe the least egregious in the tanking process, the best chance to actually improve their roster. Philadelphia shouldn't be in this conversation. The Pelicans shouldn't be in this conversation. Getting rewarded for being a poorly run organization should not be the answer. And frankly, Nets may be poorly run too. But the bottom line is we still deserve some better odds when it comes to the draft.
Yeah, like, again, I thought about that all day yesterday, about making that list of like all these other guys that are on these teams, and it's just like when you read the list, it's a total joke. Like, that's really the problem, is when you read this list of other teams and other guys that they have, it's a total joke. Now, look, Nets put themselves in this situation. No crime. Like, no one forced them to trade for James Harden, and no one forced them to sign KD and Kyrie. I think we would all made the move. So, like, it's not like the Nets, got piled
Didn't
into
have
this
some
situation.
premier talent once upon a time in the very near past.
Agreed. No one's going to want. There's going to be a certain segment of people that's like, well, cry me a river. Like, you traded all your picks, you did all this stuff. Like, you traded for Ben Simmons. Like, okay, well, you're bad. I don't know, and that's right. That's correct. All I'm saying is it highlights the problem with the lottery system, where I can list all these teams that have like super high end talent and either can't keep them healthy, can't coach anybody, can't sign all the rest of the guys, can't win games, can't just do anything else right, and then you get rewarded. That's really it's really like that part that you don't love. When you watch it played out in practice, it gets considerably worse. By the way, this has been happening for years. Like, we're just more tuned into it now because the Nets are into it. It's not like this is new. I mean, OKC a few years ago had a situation where you were like, what? Like,
this is what Koo at Locked On Pistons was wringing his hands about for years, being a horrible team and then not getting lucky in the odds and spiking a higher pick.
Yeah, so this isn't new. We're just like, it's just in our backyard now, and that's like the one. Yeah, it's just our turn to complain about it. But again, the system is still stupid, though. It's a beyond stupid system. Okay, with that note, we're going to get out of here. We're going to do Fan Take Friday here coming up on Friday. We're going to talk a little Dariq Whitehead, because it looks like he's going to be with a big club probably for the rest of it. Probably going to see some other guys as well. We'll talk about a few of these other performances in the game that Adam was able to restrain himself from bringing up during this one. In the meantime, make sure you subscribe over at Locked On Nets on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to wherever you listen to podcasts.
All right, this one's going to be a bit of a fun one here. Who gave this quote, John Wooden or Coco Chanel? Success is most often achieved by those who don't know that failure is inevitable.
Oh, one of the all-time great posts. We'll be back in tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
No, it was Coco Chanel. You got it.
I had a guess.
Well,
buddy, I rushed it. I rushed it because if you're on YouTube, the ending screen showed up, so I don't know what's going on.
Well, no. Let's be clear. Let's drag this thing right down to the ground here. It wasn't the end screen. It was the transition screen. Yeah, I pushed it, but the bottom line is it was just a transition from the quote to potential guesses. We're doing a new thing here now. Got it.
Well, this has been a special kind of episode. Again, this is kind of what you get. Look, what you might say, we're starting to tank, and that might be a fair criticism. But I'm going to guess that it was Coco Chanel. Is that my guess?
Coco Chanel, in fact, yes, but very strikingly similar to what could have been. Stay tuned tomorrow for the John Wooden version of that quote, and we'll see who could have been the better basketball coach.
I don't know who Coco Chanel is, by the way, but I'm going to say that she's one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back in tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
I think she has a perfume. Basketball.
Okay.
Basketball. Yeah. A stinky perfume.